The pavement was already too hot to kneel on when the first siren started. And I remember thinking that was wrong, because the sirens in Washington don't sound like that. I've lived in this city for 19 years. I know the tornado test on the first Wednesday of the month. That long mechanical wail that everyone has learned to ignore. I know the ambulances and the motorcade horns and the chirp the metro buses make when they kneel down for a wheelchair. I know the sound of the Capitol Police bikes and the hiss of their brakes. This was none of those. This came up out of the ground itself, low and flat and enormous, from speakers I had never once noticed bolted to the lampposts along Constitution Avenue. Gray boxes I must have walked past 1,000 times. And the moment it started, every pigeon on the National Mall went up at the same instant, thousands of them, a gray sheet peeling off the grass and the gravel paths all at once, like the lawn itself had decided to get up and leave. My daughter grabbed my sleeve. I felt her fingers close on the fabric before I felt anything else, before my mind had even finished telling me that the sound was wrong. My wife was 20 feet ahead of us with the stroller, frozen mid-step, one hand still on the push bar, looking back at me over the heads of a crowd that had stopped being a crowd and was starting to become something else. It was 10 o'clock in the morning on Memorial Day. The sky was that flat, hard blue you only get in late May before the humidity rolls in, and the heat was already coming up off the asphalt in shimmers. We had come for the wreath laying and the flyover. There were maybe 40,000 people packed between the Capitol and the Washington Monument, families on blankets, veterans in folding chairs, kids with little flags on sticks. And every one of us was standing in the open with our phones half raised toward the sky, waiting for the planes. And then every phone in every hand made the same sound at the same time. Not a text tone, the other one, the one they only use for the things they cannot take back. I want to say thank you to everyone who keeps coming back for these stories. And if this is your first time here, welcome. If grounded survival stories are the kind of thing you stay up too late listening to, settle in, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to that sidewalk, because the thing about that siren was that it didn't stop. It just kept rolling and rolling like a tide that never went back out. And within 90 seconds, I understood that the worst part wasn't the sound at all. It was the silence underneath it. The flyover never came. And 40,000 people slowly began to understand the same thing at slightly different speeds. My name is Daniel Reyes. I was 46 years old that morning, and for 22 of those years, I had worked for the city in a job nobody thinks about until the exact moment they need it and can't get it. I was a water systems engineer. I knew where the mains ran under those streets, which ones were ductile iron and which were the old pre-war cast iron that you babied like an elderly relative, where the pressure stations sat, which manholes opened into chambers a grown man could stand up in, and which opened into pipes that would pull you down and drown you before you could shout. I knew the depth of the water table under the mall, which is higher than people think, because the whole thing was a tidal marsh once, before they filled it in. I knew the bones of the city the way a surgeon knows the body under the skin. And I had brought my family downtown to watch a parade and eat overpriced hot dogs. And that knowledge was about to become the only reason any of us were still breathing by nightfall. The emergency alert on my phone was short. That was the first thing that scared me, before I'd even read the words. It was the shortness. The long alerts are the routine ones, the flash floods and the silver alerts and the boil water notices, and they're long because they have to be. Because there's procedure to explain, and nobody's actually in mortal danger. They have time to be wordy. This one was 11 words. I counted them later, lying awake. 11 words. Shelter in place, do not travel, avoid medical facilities, await instruction. I read it once and didn't understand it. Read it again and understood it too well. Read it a third time, hoping I'd misread it. Avoid medical facilities. In my entire life, in every drill and tabletop exercise I'd ever sat through with the city's emergency management people, I had never once seen a government tell its own population to stay away from hospitals. You tell people to go to hospitals. That is the entire point of a hospital. That is the one instruction so basic it never even needs to be said. The only reason on earth to tell a city of 500,000 people to avoid the one place built to help them is if the help itself had turned into the thing that killed you. If the hospitals were where it was spreading fastest. If going toward help meant walking into the center of the contamination. I found my wife's eyes across the crowd. Her name is Mara. We had been married 15 years, and in 15 years I had learned to read her face the way I read a pressure gauge. With one glance, knowing instantly whether the number was where it should be, or whether something behind the dial had gone wrong. And what I read on her face then was that she had already reached the same conclusion I had, maybe a half second before me, because she was a pediatric nurse for 9 years before Teo was born. And she knew exactly what avoid medical facilities meant in the mouth of a government. And she was already turning the stroller, already pivoting her whole body toward me. Her jaw set in that way I'd only seen a handful of times in our marriage, the way that meant she had stopped feeling anything that wasn't useful and was now simply doing the next thing. Our son, Teo, was 8 months old and asleep in that stroller, one fist up by his ear, sun hat askew, oblivious. Our daughter, Sophia, was 11 and standing right beside me with her fingers digging into my forearm hard enough to leave 4 small crescent marks that I would still be able to see that night by lantern light. She had her mother's dark eyes, and they were enormous in her face, fixed on the crowd, because she had noticed before I'd said anything that the whole world had changed temperature. Dad. Her voice was very small, smaller than I'd heard it in years. Why is everybody looking at their phones? I didn't answer her right away, because I was watching the people. And what the people were doing was the thing I needed to read. That's the thing nobody tells you about a crowd receiving terrible news all at once. It doesn't scream first. It goes quiet first. 40,000 human beings on the open grass of the National Mall. And for about 4 full seconds, you could hear the flags snapping on their poles in the breeze and the great rolling siren, and almost nothing else. Because every single person was reading the same 11 words and arriving at the same private dread at slightly different speeds. And the silence was the sound of 40,000 people doing arithmetic they didn't want to do. And then, somewhere up near 4th Street, up by the Capitol reflecting pool, one person screamed. A woman, high and sharp and cut off fast, like a hand had gone over her own mouth. And that single scream was the seam in the fabric. And the whole crowd came apart along it, all at once, the way ice goes from solid to shattered in a single instant when the crack finally finds its line. The crowd moved. All of it, all at once. And it moved toward us, because we were standing roughly between 40,000 people and the Smithsonian Metro entrance. And a panicked crowd does not flee toward the open, empty mall, where there's nothing but grass and sky. A panicked crowd runs towards doors, toward holes in the ground, toward anything that looks like it, leads somewhere away, somewhere enclosed, somewhere that feels like shelter, even if it isn't. I felt the pressure of the crowd before I felt any actual body touch me. The way you feel a wave lift you a half second before it breaks over your head. A kind of human current pulling at my legs. I did the only thing my body knew how to do, and I did it without deciding to. I went sideways instead of forward. You cannot push upstream through a panicked crowd. I knew that. I'd read the after-action reports from the stadium crushes and the festival disasters, sitting in dull afternoon trainings, never imagining I'd need them. I knew that the people who die in these things mostly die standing up, on their feet, crushed between other bodies so tightly that they cannot expand their own chests enough to draw a breath, that they suffocate vertically in a press of strangers and stay upright because there's nowhere to fall. So I did not try to go forward to reach Mara. I grabbed Sophia by the upper arm, hard enough that she gasped, and I pulled her toward the right, toward the line of food trucks and steel crowd barricades along the curb of Constitution Avenue. And instead of fighting the crowd, I let it carry us at an angle, like a man swimming diagonally across a riptide instead of straight against it, cutting across its grain, stealing every foot of westward drift I could while the current pulled us east. And the whole time, I was screaming Mara's name, and I could not hear my own voice over the noise. She'd gone down. That's what I saw when the crowd thinned for 1/2 second. A man had hit her from behind, not meaning to, just carried by the press of the people behind him. And she had gone down onto one knee with the stroller tipping sideways, and Teo, jolted awake, had started to wail. And she was 20 feet away from me with a river of human beings flowing between us in exactly the wrong direction. And there was nothing I could do. And I have never in my life felt so much like a man made of glass, watching the most important thing in the world about to break, and being unable to cross the distance. And then a stranger saved my wife's life. A woman I have never met, will never meet, will never be able to thank, planted herself in front of Mara like a fence post driven into the ground. She braced her own back against the surge of the crowd, took the shove of all those bodies on her own shoulders, and held that pocket of space open just long enough for Mara to get her foot back under herself and right the stroller and get the wheels down. I saw it happen in fragments through the gaps in the crowd, the way you see a road through trees from a moving car. The woman never looked at me. She had a gray ponytail and a Park Service polo. And she was maybe 60 and she simply did not move. And because she did not move, my wife stood up. "We can't go down there," Mara said, when we finally closed the distance, when I finally got my hand on the cold aluminum frame of the stroller and then on her wrist and felt her pulse going like a bird's. It took us another 90 seconds to close that last 20 feet. And 90 seconds is a very long time when a stranger steps full weight on your daughter's foot and she screams, and you can do nothing but hold on tighter and keep moving. But we closed it. For 1 second, all 4 of us were touching, my hand on the stroller, Sophia's hand crushed in her mother's. And I felt the circuit close, the 4 of us connected. And I knew it was the last clean breath I was going to take for a long time. Mara was looking east toward the Smithsonian Metro entrance, and her face said no before her mouth did. The entrance was about 100 yards from us, and it was a screaming knot of human beings trying to force themselves down a single staircase, built for an orderly trickle of tourists. I have personally seen the engineering drawings of that station. I know its designed capacity to the person. What was happening at the mouth of that stairwell was a mass casualty crush forming in real time, right in front of us. And even if you survived the stairs, the train, if a train even came, would be a sealed steel tube full of strangers all breathing the same recirculated air. And the one single instruction the government of the United States had managed to give us so far was to avoid the places where people gathered to be helped. "Not down," I said. Across, and then off the mall entirely. We get to high ground, hard walls, away from people, and we figure out what this actually is before we do anything else. "What is it, Dan?" Her voice cracked on my name, and I heard the nurse in her trying to hold the line against the mother in her. "What kind of thing makes them tell people to avoid hospitals?" I looked at her. and I looked at the 11 words still glowing on the cracked screen of my phone. And I told her the truth, because she was my wife, and we had agreed a long time ago, before Sophia was even born, that we would never manage each other with comfortable lies. Lies are for strangers. Something that spreads, I said, fast, and something they're afraid the hospitals will spread faster than they can treat it, which means the worst place to be right now is anywhere full of people, including here. That was the moment it stopped being a frightening morning and became the day the world I understood quietly stopped existing. Because if the thing spread, then the crowd around us wasn't just dangerous because it could crush us. The crowd around us was the danger itself. Every breath of it. 40,000 sets of lungs working in the open air. And somewhere in that crowd, statistically, mathematically, with absolute certainty, were people who already carried it and didn't know yet. Smiling, calling out for children, breathing. We needed to get small, and we needed to get far away from other people. And on the National Mall on Memorial Day, those two needs were nearly impossible to satisfy at once. Nearly. But I knew something that the 40,000 panicking people around me did not. I knew what was under the street. I had spent a career down there. Constitution Avenue runs along the entire north edge of the mall. And beneath Constitution Avenue, the way it runs beneath every major street in that city, there is a whole second city that almost no one ever sees. Storm sewers wide enough to walk through upright. Steam tunnels carrying district heat from the central plant, hot enough to cook a man. Electrical vaults the size of bedrooms, telecom conduit in fat bundles, and the thing I cared about. The thing that was mine, the water infrastructure. The trunk mains, some of them 4 feet across. The access chambers and valve pits and junction vaults. Dozens of them, most of which I had personally been inside with a flashlight and a clipboard in the years before they'd promoted me to a desk and a title. And there was one chamber in particular that I was already picturing. A big one. A junction where the north and south trunk mains crossed near 12th Street, with a working access hatch set into the median strip of Constitution itself. And enough clear floor inside for 4 people to stand without touching the pipes. It was dry most of the year. It had a steel door in one wall. It was, in that exact moment, the single safest piece of real estate I could conceive of in the entire capital. Because it was underground, sealable, away from every crowd, and known to almost no living person. But it was a half-mile east of us, back toward the worst of the crush near the Capitol. And getting there with a stroller and an 11-year-old against the grain of a stampeding crowd was going to be the hardest physical thing I had ever attempted. Listen to me. I crouched down right there on the hot pavement so that Sophia could see my whole face, so she'd know I wasn't hiding anything from her. Her chin was trembling. We're going to play a game where we hold hands, and we never, ever let go, no matter what happens. You hold your mother. You do not let go of your mother's hand for anything. If you have to choose between holding on and grabbing your phone, or your shoe, or anything else in the whole world, you let it go, and you keep holding on. Do you understand me? She nodded. She was crying, the tears just running silently down her face. But she nodded, and she didn't argue, and she didn't fall apart. And I have never, in my entire life, been more proud of another human being than I was of my 11-year-old daughter in that moment. Because she was terrified all the way down to the bone, and she still listened to me and locked her small hand into her mother's. We moved east along the curb, against the worst of the current, hugging the line of steel barricades that gave us something to brace against. I went first, breaking the crowd with my shoulder and my forearm held across my chest like a plow. opening a pocket of space behind me that Mara pushed the stroller into, with Sophia's hand locked tight in hers. We made it past the food trucks, their generators still running, the smell of fried onions and diesel absurd and wrong in all of it. We made it past the bank of porta-johns, which I steered us wide around because the smell was already getting bad and people were doing desperate, ugly things in their panic. We made it almost to 9th Street, and that was where the second alert came. I felt it before I heard it. Every phone in every hand around me buzzed at the same instant, a single, hard pulse through 40,000 pockets, the way you feel a subway coming through your feet before you ever see the headlights in the tunnel. And this time, the crowd did not go quiet first. This time, the crowd had already learned what that sound meant, and the screaming started in the same instant as the tones. No silence at all. And when I dared to look down at my screen, the words were worse than the first ones. Much worse, and they were even shorter. Confirmed. Airborne. Mask immediately. Seek lowest enclosed shelter. External transport will not arrive. Airborne. The thing was in the air I was breathing right then. And external transport will not arrive. Nobody is coming. That is what those 4 words meant once you strip the bureaucracy off them. The government of the United States of America, standing in its own front yard on the most patriotic morning of the year, had just told 40,000 of its own citizens that no help was coming, that no buses or trains or trucks would arrive to carry us out, and that we should get underground and breathe as little of the open air as we possibly could, and wait for instructions that I understood with a cold certainty might never come. And in the same instant, every single person on that mall now wanted the exact thing I wanted. They wanted to get underground. Lowest enclosed shelter, the alert had said, and they were going to fight each other tooth and nail for every hole in the earth. And the holes they knew about, the metro entrances and the museum basements and the building parking garages, were going to become tombs within the hour, packed past capacity with people breathing each other's air. But they did not know about mine. That single fact was the only edge I had in the entire world, and I was going to spend it on the 4 people I loved. And I made my private peace in that instant, walking fast with my hand on a stroller, with the knowledge that I could not save anyone else, that there were children in that crowd just like my daughter, and parents just like me, and I was going to walk past every one of them toward a door only I knew about. And I was not going to tell them where it was. That knowledge has never once left me. It is the first thing I think of on bad nights. Masks, Mara said, already moving, already pulling a clean cloth diaper from the bag and folding it twice and pressing it gently over Teo's nose and mouth, then tugging the collar of her own shirt up over the bridge of her nose. I had nothing. I pulled my own polo shirt collar up over my mouth, and I knew, with a part of my brain that read technical documents, that a cotton shirt is useless against an airborne agent, completely useless, that the particles would go through it like rain through a tennis net. But the body wants to do something. The body cannot stand to do nothing in the face of a threat. So I let it pull my shirt over my mouth, and it made me feel 1% better. And 1% was something. We turned off the curb and cut diagonally across the gravel path toward the median of Constitution Avenue. And here is where 22 years of knowing the bones of the city earned its keep for the first time. Everyone else was funneling toward the obvious openings, the metro mouths, the museum doors that I could see Smithsonian guards now frantically trying to drag shut and lock against the press of bodies. I steered my family toward a spot that looked like absolutely nothing at all. A patch of ordinary grass in the median between the eastbound and westbound lanes of Constitution, marked only by a flat steel plate set flush with the turf, and a small low collar of weathered concrete around it. The kind of thing I would have bet my pension not one single person in that entire, fleeing crowd had ever consciously seen in their lives, even the ones who walked past it every workday. "There's a door under that plate," I said. "Going down. I need 90 seconds and a little room to work. Mara, stand right over me with the stroller. Make it look like we stopped to deal with the baby. Sophia, you watch east, back the way we came, and you tell me the second anybody starts walking toward us." The plate was a Type-C access cover, the heavy kind, set into a steel frame and held down by 2 recessed Pentagon head bolts. The security bolts you cannot turn with any normal tool, because the whole point of them is that random people cannot open the street. And the proper tool, the Pentagon socket, lived on a key ring hanging on a hook in my office 4 blocks north. And I did not have it. For one cold, plunging second, I thought I had led my entire family to a dead end. That my one advantage in the whole disaster was locked behind 2 bolts I could not turn, and that I was going to have to stand up and tell my wife I'd failed. And then I remembered the multi-tool on my belt, the one Mara had given me for my 40th birthday, and had teased me about for 6 years, telling me I wore it like a man twice my age, like her own father with his tape measure clipped to his belt at every family barbecue. And I remembered that I had once, years before, standing frustrated in a field with the wrong key, taken a grinding wheel to one of that tool's flathead bits, and ground it down into a rough 5-sided pentagon shape so I could open exactly these covers without going back to the truck. I had never taken it off the tool. It had ridden on my hip every single day for 6 years. Through meetings and birthdays and grocery runs, a small ground-down piece of steel waiting for a day I had genuinely prayed would never arrive. It had arrived. I dropped to both knees on that hot steel plate, the heat of it coming straight through my pants, and I fit the ground-down bit into the recess of the first bolt. It caught. It seated. I turned, and for a sickening half-second, nothing happened. The bolt frozen by years of grit and corrosion. And then it gave. A 1/4 inch, then an inch. Then it spun free and loose in the threads, and behind me, Sophia said in a voice working very hard to stay brave, "Dad, some of the people are looking at us now." Of course they were. A man on his knees in the median, prying open the actual ground in the middle of a screaming crowd, is the single most interesting thing on the National Mall, because every person there is looking for a door, and here's a man making one out of nothing. I got the second bolt out, dropped it in my pocket without thinking, hooked my fingers into the lift slot in the plate, and heaved. It came up on its hinge with a long shriek of steel scraping steel, and underneath it was a black square mouth breathing cold air, and a ladder of steel rungs set into the concrete going straight down into the dark. And the cool mineral breath of underground came up out of that hole and touched my sweating face. And I swear to you that I have never in my life smelled anything as beautiful as that cold, wet stone dark. "Down," I said. "Sophia first. Go slow, hold the rungs, 3 points of contact. Then I hand you Teo, then your mother. Go now, baby, go, go." But by the time I'd said it, there were 3 men standing over us, having broken out of the flowing crowd, and one of them, a big man in a soaked dress shirt with his tie loose, said the exact word I'd been dreading from the second my fingers touched that plate. He looked down into the black hole, and then at me, and he said, "How many does it hold?" And I had to decide, right there, on my knees, with my daughter's head already below the level of the street, and a frightened stranger asking me, How many human beings a hole in the earth could hold? What kind of man I was going to be for the rest of however long the world had left? I am not proud of how fast the answer came out of me. I said, "It floods. It's a sump pit. There's no air down there. It's full of gas." Which was a lie, all of it. A triple lie. There was air. It did not flood in late May. There was no gas. I lied straight into a frightened man's face 3 times in one breath, to keep a steel box for my own 2 children and no one else's. He looked at me for one long second, and I will go to my grave, not knowing whether he believed the lie, or whether he simply saw something in my eyes, something flat and final, that told him I would fight him there in the median over a hole in the ground while my children watched. Either way, he turned and the 3 of them ran east toward the museums and whatever they imagined they'd find there. And I lowered my daughter down into the dark. The chamber was exactly as my memory had promised. Concrete, roughly 12 feet on a side, cool and dim, with the 2 great trunk mains crossing through it at about waist height, sweating cold condensation that dripped steadily from their bellies onto the floor. A steel access door was set into the north wall. The one I knew led into a connecting service gallery. There was clear standing room around the pipes for 4 people, just barely. Mara handed Teo down to me, his small, warm weight against my chest, the cloth diaper still over his face. And he was quiet now, eyes wide in the dimness, fascinated by the change. Then Mara came down the ladder herself, careful in her sandals, and Sophia was already pressed into the far corner with her knees drawn up to her chest, hugging them, rocking slightly. I went back up the ladder for one last thing. I reached up and got my hands on the underside of the steel plate, and I pulled it back down over the hole, seating it into its frame. And the instant it dropped home, the screaming of the city above us went away. Not faded, went away. The concrete and the packed earth and the steel ate the entire sound of a dying city whole, all at once, and we were standing in a cold, quiet box under the median of Constitution Avenue. 4 people, 2 pipes, 1 battery lantern that I always kept in the bottom of the diaper bag because Mara had laughed at me for that too. And for the first time in nearly 20 minutes, I could hear my own children breathing. Then I heard something else. It was a tapping, slow and rhythmic and metallic, and it was coming through the steel door in the north wall, the one that led into the connecting gallery. And it was the specific kind of sound that has clear intention behind it, the kind of sound a deliberate human hand makes, and not a settling pipe or a dripping joint. And we were supposed to be the only 4 people in the entire underground who knew this chamber even existed. I held up my open hand for everyone to be still. Teo had mercifully gone quiet in the cool air, working his fist against Mara's collarbone. Sophia had gone rigid against the wall, her eyes huge. Mara's eyes found mine in the yellow lantern light, and asked the question without making any sound at all. I shook my head. I didn't know. The tapping came again, and this time it was patterned, and the pattern reached down into a part of my memory that everyone has. 3 slow taps, 3 quick taps, 3 slow taps. Anyone who has ever watched a single war movie in their life knows that pattern. It was SOS, and it was being knocked out with great care and patience on the far side of a steel door, not 18 inches from where my daughter's head was pressed against the concrete, in a place where there was supposed to be no one at all. I want to tell you that I'm a brave man, but the honest truth is that for a full 10 seconds, I did absolutely nothing but stand there, with my heart slamming against my ribs, doing the arithmetic. Airborne, the second alert had said, in capital letters, mask immediately. And here, on the other side of a steel door, was a human being asking me for help. And every instinct I had as a husband and a father told me that the only safe thing in the world was to ignore that tapping and pray to God it stopped. But every other thing I knew about who I was, every reason I had spent 22 years of my life keeping a city's water clean and safe so that strangers I would never meet would not get sick, was screaming at me that you do not leave a human being tapping SOS alone in the dark. "Dad," Sophia whispered, barely a breath. "Someone's in there." The connecting gallery beyond that door was a service tunnel. I knew it intimately. I had walked its whole length more than once. It ran east and west under the median of Constitution, and it had access points of its own along the way. And crucially, it connected at its eastern end, about 300 yards down, to a sub-basement of the National Museum of Natural History, and at its western end, another 300 yards, to a chamber out near the grounds of the Washington Monument, which meant that whoever was tapping on that door had not simply stumbled in off the street by accident. There was no door from the street into that gallery. They had come through the system. They knew the system. And there were very, very few people alive in the world who knew the underground of the National Mall the way I did. I crossed to the door, set down the worst of my fear for a moment, and put my mouth close to the cold steel. "Knock twice if you can hear me," I said, loud enough to carry through. 2 knocks. Immediate, strong. A man's hand, I thought. Heavy. "Are you alone in there?" A pause. Longer this time, as if my question had to travel somewhere and come back. Then one single knock. "No." My stomach dropped through the floor. "How many of you?" A much longer pause, and I understood from the length of it that whoever was on the other side grasped that this was the question that mattered most, the one that everything else turned on. And then a series of distinct, deliberate, evenly spaced knocks began, and I counted them with my own fingertip pressed against the cold steel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then a gap, a breath. Then more, starting again. I lost count somewhere past 20, the knocks blurring together. There were more than 20 human beings on the other side of that door. More than 20. They were tapping SOS in the dark under the middle of the National Mall. They had found their way to this exact spot through tunnels that should have been known to almost no one alive, and I was standing between them and my own family with one battery lantern, a multi-tool, and the clothes on my back. And the entire crushing weight of the morning settled down onto my shoulders all at once. Because a chamber that comfortably holds 4 does not hold 27. And the airborne thing in the air above us did not care in the slightest how many lungs were crowded into the room. "Don't open it," Mara said very softly from the corner. She wasn't being cruel. There was no cruelty anywhere in her. She was being a mother, holding our son, with our daughter pressed against her side. "Dan, please. We don't know if any of them are sick. We have no way to know. If even one of them is, and you open that door, you've made the decision for all 4 of us." And she was right. That was the unbearable thing about it. She was completely, logically, medically right. And so was every single instinct I had pulling me toward that door. And there was no answer that did not cost something terrible. If those people were healthy, and I left them sealed out in that gallery, then I was condemning more than 20 human beings to die in a tunnel 1 foot away from safety with their children. If they were sick, and I opened the door and let them in, then I was killing my own son and daughter with my own 2 hands, slowly, by choice. There was no version of the next 60 seconds in which I kept my hands clean. There was only the choice of whose blood would be on them. I made everyone move. I had Mara take both children back into the far corner, behind the bulk of the crossing pipes, as far from the north door as the small chamber would physically allow, maybe 9 feet. Then I went back to the door, and I knocked once, sharply, to get their attention and signal that I was thinking. And then I did the only thing I could think of that might buy me information instead of simply buying me a death sentence. I asked the question an engineer asks. The question that only a person who truly belonged down here could possibly answer. "There's a valve in your gallery," I called through the steel. A 4-inch gate valve, mounted on the east wall, down low, near the floor. If you're really in the service tunnel, if you really belong down here, you tell me what color the hand wheel is painted, right now. It was a test, and a good one. The hand wheels in that whole system were color-coded by function, an old municipal convention. And the one in the East Gallery was a particular faded, chalky municipal blue that no one would ever simply guess. That you would only know if you had stood in that exact tunnel with a working light and looked at it. That you would only know if you were one of us, or if you'd been led down here by one of us. If the voice came back and said red or green, or said it didn't know, then they were lost civilians who'd wandered in from the museum basement in the panic. And I had one kind of terrible problem. If they knew the color, I had a different one. The answer came back through the steel, muffled but unmistakably clear. A man's voice, the first actual words I'd heard from the far side. Blue. Faded blue, more like gray now. And there's a second one about 10 feet further down the same wall, same color, and the stem packing on that one's been weeping for years. There's a salt stain under it. A pause. "You're city water, aren't you? You're one of ours." I let my forehead drop against the cold steel of the door. One of ours. There were more than 20 people sealed in that gallery, and at least one of them belonged to the very same department I did. Knew the same pipes I knew, had walked the same dark, and had clearly made the same desperate calculation I had not an hour before, dragging God knew how many people down into a hole in the earth to hide from something they couldn't see in the air. And now the two of us were standing on opposite sides of a single steel door, each of us guarding a small pocket of clean air for the people we'd led down here. And the math of it was impossible no matter which direction I worked the numbers. "What's your name?" I called. "Booker," the voice said. "Ray Booker, Distribution, West District, 26 years on the job. Who am I talking to?" I knew the name. I had never once met the man face to face. But I knew the name the way you know the names of people in your own trade you've never shaken hands with. From work orders and incident reports and overtime sheets going back the better part of a decade. Ray Booker was real. Ray Booker was precisely who he said he was. And somehow that made everything harder rather than easier. Because now I could no longer tell myself the comfortable lie that the people in that gallery were faceless strangers. "Reyes," I said. "Daniel Reyes, Engineering." A pause. Then, with something that was almost, impossibly, a dry, tired laugh buried in it. "Reyes, you signed off on my overtime once. 2-3 years back, the big water main breakout on Wisconsin, the one that ate the road. That was your signature on the sheet." Another pause, the laugh gone now. "Listen to me, Reyes, because we don't have a lot of time, and I need you thinking straight. I've got 26 people back here with me. Most of them I pulled out of the museum sub-basement when the first alert hit, and they all started screaming about going down. Families, kids, a couple of the Smithsonian custodial staff who knew me from deliveries. We're sealed in pretty good back here, the doors held. But we've got a problem, and it's not the air, not yet. It's water. Reyes, there's water coming up in the gallery. The east sump's already gone over the floor and it's still climbing. And I can't find what's feeding it. I've looked, and if it keeps coming the way it's coming, then in about 2 hours, maybe less, every single one of us back here drowns, standing up in the dark. And there it was. The chamber I had chosen as the single safest place in the entire city, the dry junction that never flooded this time of year, was connected by one steel door to a tunnel that was filling with water. And the only man alive who could possibly help me diagnose why was me. And helping him meant opening the door between his 26 sets of lungs and my 4. I looked back at my family in the corner. Mara had her arm around Sophia, and Teo held against her chest, and all 3 of them were watching me. And I understood with total clarity that whatever I decided in the next several minutes was going to be the single thing my daughter remembered about her father for the rest of her life, however long that life turned out to be. "Booker," I said carefully, keeping my voice flat and level. "Don't open this door. Whatever happens, no matter what I say, you do not open this door unless I tell you to. Now, talk to me about the water. Tell me everything." Because there was a third option, one that neither Mara's fear nor my own conscience had let me see clearly until that exact moment. I did not have to open the door to use what I knew. The water was an engineering problem, and engineering problems can be solved through 18 inches of steel by 2 men who know the same system in their bones. If I could figure out where the water was coming from, I might be able to stop it without ever once breaking the seal between us. I might be able to save all 26 of them and keep my own children safe behind the door at the same instant. It was the only path I could find that didn't end with blood on my hands either way. And it ran directly through the one thing I was better at than almost anyone alive. "Talk to me," I said. "Where exactly is the water coming up? Is it the floor, the wall, or the sump itself? Be precise, Ray. Our lives are riding on you being precise." "Sump first," Booker called back. "It came up the sump. Overflowed the lip maybe 40 minutes ago. Slow at first. But now I'm seeing it weep along the base of the west wall too. The wall between your chamber and mine. And Reyes, it's coming up faster than any sump backup I've ever seen in 26 years. This isn't groundwater. This isn't the table rising. This is pressurized. Something's broke open upstream, and it's pushing. Pressurized. That one single word reorganized everything inside my head. The way one correct measurement can suddenly make a whole confusing drawing snap into focus. A sump filling slowly with rainwater and seepage is a nuisance, an annoyance, something you call out a crew for on a Monday. But pressurized water coming up through a floor and weeping through a foot of concrete wall means that a main has ruptured somewhere upstream. And a ruptured main does not stop pushing on its own. Not ever. It pushes and pushes until a human being closes a valve. And the only valves that could possibly isolate this section of the system were the ones I had spent an entire career learning the locations of. And at least one of them, I was now suddenly certain, was in the chamber with me, on my side of the door. "Listen to me very carefully now," I said. And I made my voice into the one I'd used on construction sites for 20 years, the flat, slow voice for when men's lives are on the line, and panic is the real enemy. If it's pressurized, and it's weeping through the wall we share, then the break is upstream of both of us, west of you, and the water's traveling east down through your gallery, looking for the lowest place it can find to fill. You can't stop it from in there, Ray. There's nothing in your gallery to stop it with. But I might be able to stop it from in here. There's an isolation valve in my chamber, a 12-inch gate. If it's the one I think it is, if it feeds the trunk that runs along your wall, then I can close it and starve the break of water. Cut it off at the source. Then close it Booker said. And the raw relief in his voice was an awful thing to hear, because I had not yet told him the rest of it. The rest was this. The 12-inch gate valve in my chamber was on the south main, and I was not certain, not truly certain, that it was the correct one. There were 2 great trunk mains crossing through my chamber, and they fed different pressure zones of the city. And if I closed the wrong one, I would accomplish absolutely nothing for Booker's gallery while wasting minutes none of us had. And worse than that, far worse, closing a 12-inch gate valve that has not been operated in years is not something one man does easily, or sometimes at all. Those valves seize in place. The stems corrode solid in their nuts. You can throw your entire body weight against the wheel and feel it give a single grudging quarter turn, and then stop absolutely dead. And a gate valve that is stuck half-closed in a pressurized main is more dangerous than one left fully open, because the water screaming through the narrowed gap accelerates and begins to hammer. And water hammer is a thing that tears pipes apart at the joints. I crossed the chamber to the south main and found the valve exactly where my memory had placed it, low on the pipe near the floor. A cast-iron hand wheel the size of a dinner plate, painted that same chalky municipal blue, furred all around the stem with rust the color of dried blood. I put my bare hand on the rim of the wheel, and it was cold and rough, and it did not want to be touched by anyone. Then I laid my open palm flat against the steel of the pipe itself, just above the valve, and I felt it. A faint, fast, fine vibration coming up through the metal into the bones of my hand. The absolutely unmistakable signature of water moving through that line at high velocity. This was the live main. This was the one carrying the brake. But which brake? Was this the line feeding the wall of Booker's gallery, or was it the other one? I crossed back to the north main, the one running along the wall between my chamber and his gallery. And I laid my palm flat against its steel and held it there, eyes closed, the way you hold a hand on a sleeping child's back to feel them breathe. And it was still, dead still. No vibration at all, not the faintest tremor, which meant the water flooding Booker's gallery was not coming through the pipe in his own wall. It was coming through the south main, my side, breaking out somewhere upstream, and traveling along a path neither of us could see directly, finding its way down into his sump from some joint or crack we'd never trace in time, which meant that if I closed the south valve, I would stop the water that was drowning him. I was almost sure. Almost. And almost is a terrible word to bet 30 lives on. But the water does not pause to wait for a man to become certain. "Booker," I called. "I'm going to close a valve now. When I do, the flow into your gallery should start to slow within a couple of minutes and then stop. But if it doesn't slow, if it speeds up instead, or if you start hearing banging in the walls, a hammering sound, then you knock on this door like the building's burning down, because that means I've closed the wrong one, and I'll open it back up and try the other. You understand me?" "Understood. Reyes, whatever you're about to do, you do it fast. It's up to my ankles now, and the kids back here are already off the floor, up on the catwalk." I braced my left boot against the base of the pipe, wrapped both hands around the cold iron rim of the hand wheel, set my shoulders, and I pulled. Nothing. The wheel might as well have been a single casting with the stem welded solid. I shifted my grip, planted myself better, and threw my whole shoulder into it. And I felt it give the smallest fraction of a degree. A deep groan of protesting metal that traveled straight up both my arms and into my back teeth. And then it stopped, seized, half a turn from where it needed to be, and a half-closed gate valve in a live pressurized main is the most dangerous single object in this entire story so far, because the gate inside it has now become a knife edge sitting in a torrent, and the whole length of pipe had begun to shudder under my hands. A low, ugly drumming I could feel through the soles of my boots and through my knees on the wet concrete. "Dad!" Sophia's voice, thin and high and frightened, from the corner. "The pipe is shaking. Why is it shaking?" "I know, baby, I know. It's okay. Stay right where you are in the corner with Mom." I needed leverage. A hand wheel that size, on a stem that has seized. You do not open with your bare hands, no matter how strong you think you are. You open it with a valve key, a long steel T-handle that multiplies your force by the length of its arm. And I did not have a valve key. I had a multi-tool, a battery lantern, and 4 people I loved in a concrete box. The drumming in the pipe was getting worse, climbing in pitch and intensity. And I had already committed. That was the trap of it. A half-closed valve cannot simply be left half-closed in a live main. The water hammer will find the weakest joint in the whole system and tear it open. And then both chambers flood at once, and I will have killed every soul down here, my own children first, by being almost right. I looked around that bare concrete box for anything I could use as a cheater bar, anything I could slip through the spokes of that hand wheel to double or triple my torque. And there was nothing. The chamber was swept bare, just pipes and concrete. And then my eyes landed on the ladder. The steel ladder bolted to the wall directly under the access hatch. And it wasn't really a ladder, not a single welded unit. It was a series of individual steel rungs anchored separately into the concrete. And the top one, the one nearest the hatch, was loose. I'd felt it shift under my weight on the way down, and filed the fact away without thinking. The way you note a loose stair tread in your own house. I climbed up 2 rungs, got both hands on that loose top one, and I wrenched it back and forth, hard, side to side, and the old corroded anchor bolts ground in their sockets and worked loose, and the rung came free in my hands. And just like that, I was holding a solid 30-inch bar of steel. "Mara," I said, climbing back down. "Cover the kids' ears, both of them, now!" I jammed the steel rung through 2 opposite spokes of the hand wheel, set my feet wide on the wet floor, took 1 breath, and I put my entire body weight onto the far end of that lever, all 200 pounds of me hanging and pushing at once, and the wheel screamed. A high tearing shriek of metal, and the stem turned. And the gate inside the ground shut, another quarter turn, and the drumming in the pipe changed its pitch, climbed higher and angrier, the water finding the narrowing gap and accelerating through it. And I knew with absolute certainty that if I stopped now, we were all dead. So I reset the bar in the next pair of spokes and threw myself onto it again. And again. The valve closed in awful grinding increments, while the pipe bucked and shuddered under my feet like something alive, trying to throw me off. And sweat ran into my eyes in a place that had felt cold 5 minutes earlier. And on the 4th pull, the 4th time I hung my whole weight on that steel bar, the wheel suddenly broke free and spun smooth and easy through the final quarter turn and seated home with a soft, heavy, final thunk, and the drumming stopped. The chamber went silent. Truly, completely silent. I stood there with the steel bar still in my hands and my chest heaving like a bellows, and I waited, listening past the blood in my own ears. "Booker," I called when I could speak. "Talk to me. What's it doing?" Nothing came back for 10 seconds. 20. Long enough for the cold fear to come flooding back, long enough for me to start to believe I'd closed the wrong one. And then his voice. And there was something different in it now. Something cracked wide open. It stopped. Reyes. It stopped. The level's holding. It's holding right where it is. It's not coming up anymore. A breath that was almost a sob. You did it. You crazy son of a, it's holding. Sophia started to cry, the loose, racking, exhausted crying of pure relief. Then Mara closed her eyes and pressed her lips down against the top of Teo's head, and stayed like that. And I sat down hard on the cold, wet floor, with my back against the dead north pipe, the steel bar across my knees. And for about 30 seconds, I let myself believe that the hardest part of the entire day was now behind us. It was a sweet 30 seconds. I have thought about it many times since. It was the last truly clean moment I had, the last time I believed that the problem in front of me was the whole of the problem. Because then Booker said, through the door, in a different and much lower voice, a voice clearly meant only for me and not for the 26 frightened people behind him. Reyes, now that the water's stopped, I've got to tell you something, and I need you to keep your head while I do, because your kids are right there. That water, it wasn't a broke main. I lied to you a little, to keep my own people from coming apart while I figured out what to do. I know exactly where the break is. There's a man up the west end of the gallery, and he opened it, on purpose, with his own hands. And he's still up there right now. And he's not right, Reyes. He's not sick like the thing in the air. He's something else. And he knows for certain now that there's somebody alive down here on this side. Because he heard your valve close, just like I did. I got to my feet very slowly, my legs not quite steady under me. Say all of that again, slower. There's a man in the tunnel who flooded us on purpose, Booker said. A government type. He came down before any of the rest of us, like he was already down here waiting when the alert hit, with a hard black case and a keyring that opened doors I didn't even know had locks on them. When the water first started coming, I went looking for the source, and I found him at the West Isolation Vault, with the drain valves cracked wide open, deliberately flooding the low galleries, working at it steady and calm like a man doing a job. And when I asked him what in the hell he thought he was doing, he stood up and he showed me a badge. And he told me, calm as anything, that this section was being sacrificed to protect the line, and that I should go back to my people and seal my door and wait. Sacrificed to protect the line, Reyes. Those were his exact words. I have worked this system for 26 years, every kind of emergency there is. And I'm telling you, there is no protocol on God's green earth that says you drown a tunnel full of living people, full of children, to protect a water line. The cold that went through me then had nothing whatsoever to do with the temperature of the chamber, because I knew, the way you know a thing in your spine, a full second before your mind catches up and confirms it, that Booker was right, and that the precise word the man had used was the key that turned the lock on everything. Sacrificed to protect the line, not the water line, the other kind of line, a containment line, a cordon. Somewhere far above our heads, the people running the response to whatever had been released into the air that morning had drawn a perimeter on a map, fast and frightened, and our section of the underground had fallen on the wrong side of it. And a man with a badge and a ring of keys had been sent down into the tunnels, not to save a single soul, but to make absolutely certain that the wrong side of that line stayed sealed and flooded and silent. And I had just undone 40 minutes of his patient work with a steel rung in my own 2 hands. Booker, I said, very carefully now. What's in the hard case, the black one? I don't know, he said. A pelican case, the heavy waterproof kind, black, about so big I'd guess. But here's the thing, Reyes. He kept one hand on it the entire time I was talking to him. Never let go of it. And there was frost on it. Frost on the latches, white, in a tunnel that's 60 degrees year-round. Whatever's inside that box, he was keeping it cold, ice cold. And he was willing to drown 26 people to keep it down here, sealed away from the surface. And I'll tell you what I think, for what it's worth. I don't think a man does that to protect something. I think a man does that to bury something. And if I'm right about that, then it's not just us he came down here to deal with. It's whatever's in that case, too. We open this door, Reyes. We're not just walking past a man. We're walking past the reason they drew the line in the first place. I stood there in the cold and the silence with my hand resting flat against the steel door and my family 9 feet behind me in the dark. And I understood that the morning had turned over once again, the way it had kept turning over since 10 o'clock. Each turn revealing that the thing I'd been afraid of a minute ago was only the small outer version of something much larger underneath. First it was a crowd, then it was a contagion, then it was a flood, then it was a man. And now it was a frost-cold black case, carried by a man who had been sent to make certain it stayed buried forever under the National Mall along with every single person unlucky enough to be sealed in beside it. If you were 9 feet from your own children, with one single way out, and that one way ran directly past a man guarding the very thing the entire city was being evacuated because of, I genuinely want to know what you would have done. Tell me in the comments, because I've asked myself that exact question on more nights than I can count. And all this time later, I'm still not sure that I chose right. But I made my choice. I lifted the latch. The door opened on a low concrete gallery maybe 8 feet wide. And the first thing that hit me was the smell. Wet raw concrete and rust, and the close warm reek of too many human bodies packed into too small a space. The second thing was the light. A dozen phone flashlights and a pair of orange-tinted battery work lights all swinging toward me at once, blinding. And the third thing, once my eyes adjusted, was the water. Standing water, 6 inches deep, perfectly flat and black and dead still across the entire floor of the gallery, reflecting every one of those little lights back up at the ceiling so that it looked, for one disorienting second, like a field of stars laid flat on the ground. And standing in that black water, packed back toward the far east end, were Booker's people, their faces white and stunned in the phone light, more than 24 of them. There were children among them. An old woman was sitting up on a younger man's shoulders to keep her out of the wet. A young man in a Smithsonian polo shirt was holding a toddler high against his chest, the toddler's shoes dangling. And every one of them looked at me opening that door like I was either their salvation or their next disaster arriving. And the terrible thing was that they were right not to know which one I was. Booker was a big man, bigger than his voice had suggested. Somewhere in his 50s, gray coming in at the temples, soaked to the knees, with a face that had spent a lot of years outdoors and underground. He reached out and gripped my hand once, hard, calloused, and pulled me through into the gallery. And I turned immediately and reached back to help Mara down with Teo, then Sophia, and my family stepped down into the black water and was swallowed into the crowd of strangers. And there was no going back into the safe dry box now. The choice was made, and it was made permanently. We were all on the same side of the door now, breathing the same thick air, 26 and 4. 30 human souls standing in a flooding tunnel under the dead center of the capital of the United States. West is that way, Booker said, low, close to my ear, pointing into the solid dark beyond the reach of the work lights, where the gallery ran on past where the phones could throw any light at all. Maybe 90 feet down to the isolation vault where I found him. The water gets deeper that way. It all pools at the low point in the vault. He was in the vault when I left him to come back to my people. I don't know if he's still down there or not. He's still there, I said, with a certainty I felt all the way down. He won't leave until he's sure this section is dead. He's waiting out the air and the water both. He thinks we're already finished, just slow about it. I looked down at the standing black water, 6 inches here at the high east end, deeper ahead where it ran west into the dark. And I thought about 30 people, half of them children, wading through that water toward a man who had already tried once to drown them. And I knew I could not move all of them at once, not quietly, not without the noise of 30 people splashing through standing water carrying 90 feet down a concrete tunnel to a man whose entire job, at this point, was listening for any sign that we were not yet dead. Booker. I go first, alone. I need to lay eyes on him before he lays eyes on all of us. And I need to know what's actually in that case before 30 people, your kids included, wade into a vault with a man holding it. You keep everyone here, and you keep them dead quiet. If I'm not back in a reasonable time, or if you hear me shout, then you take these people east, back to your own sealed door, and you wait there, because at least the water's stopped rising on that end now. You understand me, Ray? You shouldn't go down there alone. His jaw was set. 2 of us. We deal with 1 man easier than 1 of us does. I know this tunnel better than any living man, and I move quieter by myself than I do with somebody else. 1 set of feet, not 2. I caught Mara's eyes over Booker's shoulder, across the heads of the crowd, in the swinging light, and she knew. She always knew. And she didn't argue, didn't say a word. She just nodded once and pulled Sophia in tighter against her hip. And I saw her lips moving. And I knew she was telling our daughter that Daddy would be right back. The exact thing you say to a child when you're not at all sure it's true. I waded west into the dark, away from the lights and the warmth of the crowd. And the water climbed steadily up my shins and then my knees. Cold enough that the ache of it started in the bones of my feet within seconds. The gallery narrowed as it ran west and the ceiling dropped, so that I had to stoop and then crouch. The cold water at my thighs now. And ahead of me, a faint light began to grow. A hard white LED glow, steady and cold and clinical, spilling out of an opening on the left side where the gallery met the isolation vault. I covered the last 20 feet without breathing, feeling for each footfall under the black surface with the toe of my boot before I committed any weight to it, so that I wouldn't splash, wouldn't send a single ripple ahead of me. And I came up to the edge of that lit opening, and I leaned my head slowly around the corner and looked into the vault. It was a square concrete room, considerably larger than my chamber, packed with the great valves and manifolds where 4 trunk mains came together in the heart of this section of the entire system. The water in it was deeper, up past the knee, and standing on a raised concrete plinth above the waterline, dry from the thigh up, was the man. He was younger than I'd built him up to be in my head. 40 maybe, lean, in dark tactical clothing with no patches and no markings of any kind, soaked from the thigh down. He had a headlamp throwing that hard white cone, and it swung as he moved his head. And at his feet on the plinth, where the water couldn't reach it, sat the black pelican case. And the heavy latches caught his headlamp and gave back a dull silver gleam. And Booker had been exactly right. There was frost on them, a fine white rime of frost on the latches and the seams in a tunnel that holds 60 degrees in every season. Which meant that whatever was sealed inside that case was so cold that it was pulling the moisture straight out of the air a foot away from it and freezing it. And the man was not waiting idly. He had a satellite phone pressed to his ear, the stubby military kind with the fat stub antenna, and he was speaking into it, and the hard, flat concrete of the vault carried his voice across the water to me in broken pieces. I caught, "Sections not draining, the low galleries holding water. Somebody closed the south gate manually." And then a pause, and then, "No, I'm telling you there are survivors down here. The gate did not close by itself. Somebody's working the system against me." And then, and this is the part that stopped my heart cold in my chest, understood. If the section can't be cleared by flooding, then I'm authorized to proceed to the thermal option. Confirm thermal authorization. A pause while he listened. Copy that. Proceeding. Thermal option. I did not know precisely what those two words meant, and I did not need to. A man kneeling over a frost-cold case in a sealed concrete vault, receiving authorization to proceed to a thermal option now that the drowning had failed, is a man who is about to make absolutely certain that everything in this section of the underground, the contagion source in his case, and every living person who happened to be sealed in alongside it, ceases entirely to exist, in a way that leaves nothing behind to spread and nothing behind to find. The cold case wasn't being preserved. It was being staged. And the survivors, my family included, were not an obstacle to his mission. We were part of what the mission had been designed from the start to erase. I had maybe a minute, maybe less than that, and 30 people behind me in the dark, 4 of them mine. Here is what I knew that the man on the plinth did not. I knew that the vault he was standing in was the absolute lowest point in the entire section, which is precisely why the water pooled there and stood deepest. And I knew that the great manifold standing right beside him, the assembly his cold case was sitting next to, fed by the south main I had shut down with my own hands, still held the full pressure of the enormous column of trapped water standing in the main above the closed gate. Hundreds of feet of head pressure with nowhere on earth to go. And I knew, because I had inspected this very vault more than once, that there was a blow-off valve. Low on that manifold assembly, a 4-inch bronze fitting near the floor, designed to dump the line fast and hard in an emergency. And I knew that if I opened it, all that trapped pressure in the dead main would discharge into the vault in a single, solid, violent jet of water, a battering ram, enough to knock a standing man clean off his feet and fill that low room to the ceiling in under a minute. It would also flood the gallery behind me. It would put the water up to the chests of the children Booker was holding back 90 feet east. But it would reach them slower, all that volume spreading out through the whole length of the gallery. And Booker would have time, minutes, to move them up onto the high east ledge and through the sealed door. The man in the vault would have seconds. And whatever the thermal option turned out to be, a man swept off a plinth and slammed underwater in a violently flooding concrete box, fighting for his own life in the dark, is not a man calmly finishing a procedure. It was the worst thing I've ever planned to do to another living human being. And I planned the whole of it in about 4 seconds, crouched there in the dark with black water at my knees. And I have never once managed to untangle in my own mind whether what I did next was murder or rescue. And a long time ago, I stopped trying to. The blow-off valve was on the near side of the manifold, 4 feet in past the vault opening, below the black water line, on my side of the room. To reach it, I would have to step fully into the vault, into his light, into his direct line of sight, and turn a stiff old bronze valve underwater, while a man not 20 feet away held a satellite phone and, for all I knew, a weapon under that dark jacket. I still had the steel ladder rung jammed through my belt where I'd put it after the gate valve. I drew it out slowly. I took one full breath of the cold, rust-smelling air. And then I went in low and fast, around the corner and straight down onto my knees in the freezing water, plunging both hands and the steel bar down to where I knew the blow-off valve had to be, feeling for it completely blind under the black surface, while the man's headlamp snapped toward me and his voice cut off mid-word, and he came up off his crouch, shouting something that I never once heard him the words of. My fingers found the small bronze handwheel. It was crusted and stiff and reluctant. I jammed the steel rung through it and hauled on the bar with everything I had left in my arms. And for one endless second, nothing moved at all, the valve frozen by years. And in that second, I saw the man's hand drop away from the phone and reach behind his own back, under the jacket. And then the valve cracked open under my hands, and the trapped main let go. The sound it made was not a splash. It was a detonation of water, a white roar that filled the entire vault in an instant with stinging spray and deafening noise. The jet from the blow-off hammering straight across the room at the exact level of a standing man's chest. And it caught him as he was rising and reaching. And it took him off the plinth like a man's hand sweeping a single chess piece off a board, sideways and gone, and the black case went with him, knocked off the concrete and into the churning, climbing water. And the man went down hard against the far concrete wall and came up flailing in water that was already at his waist and rising fast. I did not wait to watch any of it. I turned and I drove back east through the gallery against the spreading flood, the water already climbing to my thighs, shouting Booker's name as I came, shouting, move them east, the water's coming, get them up to the high door. And behind me, the vault filled, and the roar of it chased me down the tunnel like a living thing. I came back into the orange work light, soaked through and gasping, and the water was already at the people's knees and climbing. And Booker had read it before I'd reached him, before I'd finished shouting. He had the whole crowd already moving east toward the sealed door at the high end of the gallery, herding them with his big arms spread wide, lifting the smallest children clear of the water and passing them hand to hand. And Mara had Teo up high on her shoulder, and Sophia's hand locked in her own, and she was moving with the rest of them, steady, not panicking. And I caught up and swept Sophia up onto my back, her arms tight around my neck. And we all waited for the high ground at the east end, where the floor rose up a full foot above the rest, and the sealed door stood. The same door I'd told Booker to wait behind, the one leading back toward my original chamber and the dead south gate where the water had already been stopped once. And that was the trap I had set for myself, without ever seeing it coming. The west way out, the bricked-off spur to the Federal Triangle, the only path to the surface that bypassed the cordon line entirely, ran west, through the flooding vault, past the drowning man and his frost-cold case. I had flooded the only route I'd had to escape with my family. I had bought 30 human lives a stay of execution by sealing off our own way out in the doing of it. We crowded up onto the high east ledge, 30 people pressed together on a single foot of dry concrete, with the rising black water lapping closer and closer toward the lip of it. And I got the sealed door open with the pentagon bit of my multi-tool on the simple maintenance lock that the man's key ring had thrown earlier. It gave onto a short stub gallery that dead-ended in 20 feet at the locked connection to the museum sub-basement. The one Booker had told me was shut and locked from the far side. We were out of the rising flood, but we were now sealed into a pocket of the underground, with one locked door standing between us and the rest of the world. And the water was still rising behind us, slower now, spreading out through the volume of the whole drowned section, but still rising toward the ledge. "It'll equalize," I said, mostly to myself, doing the arithmetic out loud the way I do when I need badly to believe my own numbers. The blow-off dumps the whole trapped column, and then it's spent. There's no more pressure feeding it. The south gates shut tight. Nothing else can come in. It rises until the head pressure equalizes across the section. And then it stops. It has to stop. And I prayed I was right. Because if I had the volume wrong, if there was more water in that trapped column than the section could hold below the level of our ledge, then I had simply changed the manner in which 30 people were going to die. Traded drowning slow for drowning fast. So we watched the water. 30 filthy, soaked people standing on a concrete shelf in the near dark, watching black water climb a concrete wall by the dying light of a handful of phones. And it rose. And it slowed. And an inch below the lip of our ledge, an inch from the toes of the children, it stopped. It held. It sat there flat and black and patient, and it did not come the final inch. And somewhere out in the drowned vault, deep under all of it now, lay a frost-cold black case, and the man who had carried it down here, and the thermal option, whatever in God's name it had been, had gone into the water along with him. I would dearly love to tell you that we were found and rescued an hour later. We were not. The locked connection to the museum's sub-basement would not open. Not with my multi-tool, not with Booker and me and the young man in the Smithsonian polo throwing our shoulders against it together for the better part of an hour until all three of our shoulders gave out and we slid down the wall to sit in defeat because it was locked from the far side with a real lock, a heavy one. And the far side was where the line had been drawn on someone's map. And the people who had drawn that line had absolutely no intention of opening it for anyone. We were inside the cordon. And the cordon held against us as completely and indifferently as it held against the invisible thing in the air above. We were down there for 19 hours. I am not going to pretend to you that I can recount all 19 of those hours, because most of them were taken up by the particular slow agony of waiting in the dark, of rationing the 4 granola bars from the bottom of the diaper bag among the children, one careful broken square at a time, of taking turns sitting in the one dry corner, of Teo's exhausted crying, and then, far more frightening, of Teo's not crying, his going quiet and slack with thirst until Mara wet his cracked lips with the cleanest water we could find, which was the condensation we wiped off the dead-cold north pipe with the hem of a shirt and squeezed out drop by drop. I'm not going to dwell on the old woman who stopped responding to anyone around hour 14, or on the way Booker and the young man and I moved her gently to the back of the pocket and put a coat over her, and said absolutely nothing about it to the children. Survival down there was not heroic. It was small and patient and humiliating. And it was mostly about water and air and keeping 30 frightened people from turning on one another in the dark. And Booker was far better at that last part than I was, because Booker had spent 26 years working alongside crews in the worst places the city had. And he knew exactly how to keep frightened men steady, with nothing but his voice and his presence. I learned more about how to lead human beings from that soaked, exhausted man on that concrete ledge in one night than I had learned in 22 years of meetings and titles. What I will tell you is how it ended. Because the ending is the part I still do not fully understand. And the part you came all this way to hear, somewhere around hour 19. The water began to drop, not quickly, an inch, and then after a long while, another inch. Somewhere, someone had opened the gate I'd closed, or another one downstream of us, and the section was draining, which meant someone was down in the system on foot, someone with the keys, and we had no way at all to know whether that someone was coming to rescue us or coming to finish the work the man in the vault had started. We had a long, ugly, exhausted argument on that ledge about whether to make noise or stay completely silent. 30 people with 30 opinions and no way to know. And in the end, it was Booker who decided it. Because Booker said a thing I have never once forgotten and never will. He said, if they'd wanted us dead, they never needed to come down here at all. They just needed to walk away and leave us. Anybody who comes down through that water on foot is coming down to get somebody out. So we made noise. We banged on the steel door with the ladder rung. In threes, 3 slow, 3 quick, 3 slow. The very same pattern that had started this whole thing on the other side of a different door 19 hours before. And then we waited in the draining dark. They came through the museum connection. 3 of them, in full hazmat suits with their own bottled air on their backs. And the lead one unlocked the door from the far side with a key on a ring. And the cone of a real flashlight, blinding and white, swept across 30 filthy, soaked, half-dead survivors standing and sitting on a concrete ledge. And through the faceplate of that suit, I watched the lead man's eyes go wide. And I understood in that single instant that he had not expected to find one single living person down here, that this whole section had been written off and marked cleared on someone's board, and that our banging on the steel in the dark was the only reason on earth that a recovery team had even cracked that door at all. They were not the man from the vault. They were National Guard, attached to a federal response, and they were every bit as shocked to find us alive as we were to be found. And the questions came later, many of them, in a quarantine tent set up right on the mall, where they held all 30 of us for 6 days while they drew our blood over and over again, testing for a thing that, it turned out, not one of us carried. Because here is the part I only learned later, in pieces, from a young soldier who talked too much during a long shift, and from the careful shape of the things that did and did not make it into the official account. The airborne agent that emptied the National Mall that Memorial Day morning was real, and it was bad, and it killed people, but its actual spread was far narrower than the panic had been, tightly concentrated near the capital end where it had been released. And the cordon they drew across the underground had been drawn fast and wide on incomplete and frightened information in the first chaotic hour. And our section fell inside that line, not because anyone in it was infected, but because nobody in the chaos of that morning could be certain that we weren't. And because a channel of connected tunnels running north under the city was exactly the kind of thing a frightened planner draws a line around. And a man had been sent down into those tunnels, not to save anyone, but to make absolutely certain the underground could not become a path for the thing to spread north under the streets. And the case he carried, kept frost cold, was not a sample to be buried. It was the source. It was what was left of the device that had released the agent in the first place, recovered near the Capitol. And they were moving it down through the tunnels to the lowest, most sealed, most forgettable point in the entire system. And the thermal option had been meant to destroy it past any chance of recovery or reuse, to erase it from the world. And the section was supposed to be empty when he did it. And it was not empty, because a single water engineer had pried open a steel plate in the median of Constitution Avenue and led his family, and then 26 strangers, into the one pocket of the underground that the men above had already quietly decided to erase. The man from the vault did not survive. They recovered him and the case from the drained vault, and I have never been told what was written in the official report about how he died. And I have never once asked, and in all the years since, no one has ever come to ask me a single question about it either. And that silence has told me more than any report ever could. I think they were not eager to write down anywhere that 26 private citizens and a family of 4 had been sealed inside a designated sacrifice zone, together with the source of the outbreak and the man sent down to incinerate it. And that the only reason any of them ever walked back out into the daylight was that one of them happened to know where a 4-inch blow-off valve was, and used it on a federal officer, and drowned the very thing the entire capital was being evacuated to contain. Some stories don't ever get written down anywhere. They just get to walk back out into the sun and try, slowly, to become people again. Mara and the children and I walked out of that quarantine tent on the 6th day into a city that was working very hard to convince itself that it was fine, and that mostly it had been. And that was the strangest part of all of it, honestly. The flags were back up on their poles. The streets had been washed clean. The mall was green and empty and ordinary in the early summer sun. The gravel paths raked, as if 40,000 people had never come apart on them, screaming. Teo doesn't remember any of it, and never will. Sophia remembers every minute of it, and Mara and I have spent a great deal of the time since making very sure that what she carries forward isn't only the dark and the cold water and the not crying. We make sure she remembers the woman with the gray ponytail who planted herself in front of her mother in the crowd and would not move. We make sure she remembers Booker keeping 30 frightened people steady with nothing but his voice in the dark. We make sure she remembers the strangers on that ledge who gave the last broken squares of the granola bars to the children and went without themselves. She remembers that her father pried open the ground and got them out. And I have let her keep that version because it is true. All of it is true. And the other version, the man on the plinth, the bronze valve under the black water, the choice I made in 4 seconds in the dark, that one is mine to carry and not hers, and it always will be. I still work for the city. I still know where every main runs under those streets, and I still wear the multi-tool on my belt every single day. And Mara doesn't tease me about it anymore. Not once since. Sometimes, late at night, on the nights when I can't sleep and there's no use pretending I will, I drive down to the mall and I park along Constitution Avenue. And I look out at the median, at a single, flat steel plate set into the green turf that 40,000 people walk past every day without ever once wondering what's underneath it. And I think about the cool, clean breath of the dark that came up out of that hole, and how grateful I was for it, how it felt like salvation against my face. And I think about how it was the inside of a coffin that somebody had already chosen, marked, and written off before I ever touched the plate, and how the safest place in the whole city, the one place I knew about that no one else did, turned out to be the one place I never ever should have gone. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end of this, then thank you. Truly, I mean that. I don't tell this story for anyone's sympathy. I tell it because I want people to understand that the worst danger that morning was never the thing in the air. The thing in the air was real, and it was terrible, and I won't pretend otherwise. But the thing that nearly killed my children was the line somebody drew on a map, fast and frightened, with the best of intentions probably, and the way that line silently decided who was worth saving, and who had already been written off, and how easily I and everyone I love ended up on the wrong side of it without a single person ever asking us. Tell me, if you'd been standing on that ledge in the dark with the water below you and the locked door above you, would you have made the noise, or would you have stayed silent and hidden, in case the people coming were the wrong people? Booker bet 30 lives that anyone coming down on foot was coming to save us. He was right. But I have thought, every single day since, about how close a thing it was, and about the men who drew the line, who to this day do not know my name, and who would tell you, if you ever asked them, that the operation that Memorial Day was a success, and that the affected section was fully cleared. And in a way that's true. It was cleared. We just happened to still be alive inside it when they cleared it, and we banged on a door in the dark, and someone, somewhere, against their orders or beyond them, decided to listen. That's the whole difference in the end. That's all of it. The difference between the people who came home from under that street and the people who didn't isn't courage. And it isn't planning. And it isn't even luck. Not really. It's that someone, standing on the far side of a sealed door with the authority to keep walking, decided instead to stop and listen and open it. I think about that a lot. Down there in the quiet with my hand on a cold steel plate. I think you should too.